Hey folks, we just got done riding Suzuki's 2023 SV650. This could be our last ride review of Suzuki's tried and true SV650 because, as you know, it's introducing its GSX-8S, which is undoubtedly the replacement for this bike. Now, the SV650 was originally introduced for the 1999 model year. It is designed to be a middleweight V-twin powered naked bike. When the SV650 hit the scene, it was an immediate favorite amongst riders. It represented great value. It had good power, a nice charismatic engine. It wasn't too big, wasn't too small, and it really had a great package. It was such a great package that folks used the bike to make them into track bikes and racing bikes with just a careful set of modifications, and these bikes really became cult favorites. Well, the SV650 did really well for a long time. Then in the 2010s, it replaced it with the Gladius. It didn't look that different, but it was definitely more bulbous in the way that Suzuki bikes were at that time, and it really fell out of love with the motorcycling audience. Then a few years ago in 2019, Suzuki tried to do the SV650X, which was a cafe-inspired version of this bike, and that didn't really go over well. But fast forward to today, Suzuki continues to campaign its SV650 for now for the 2023 model year. The last time this bike saw an overhaul was for the 2017 model year. And Suzuki did what they normally do with their legacy models. They change a lot of parts, yet the bike doesn't really change that much. But that's a good thing because we really like the 645cc V-twin engine in this thing. It benefits from water cooling, double 4-valve cylinder heads, and dual overhead cams. This engine's good for right around 69, 70 horsepower at the business end of that 160/60 rear tire. And the good thing about these V-twin engines is they're awesome because they make for a really narrow motorcycle. They have a lot of charisma, they have a lot of torque, they have a cool sound that the parallel twins, they can imitate. They're not quite the same as these classic V-twin engines. Another cool thing about this engine is it makes the majority of its torque over 35 pound-feet of torque from as low as 3,000 RPM. It peaks around 45 pound-feet. So very nice that you have a lot of usable power at a low RPM range. Speaking of the engine, we got around 40 miles per gallon out of this bike. It's got a 3.8 gallon capacity fuel tank. I wish it was a little bit bigger just based on how fun this bike is to ride, but 40 miles per gallon is nothing to sneeze at, especially compared to a lot of bikes that are a lot thirstier today. We also like that this motorcycle can run on 87 octane. A lot of bikes require 91, but not the SV650. You can run 87 octane in it, and it runs just fine. Now, the engine's hung in a steel trellis type frame, and the reason why we like this frame so much is not only is it a Ford for a really narrow motorcycle, but this chassis has a lot of feel. It goes over the bumps real right. Yeah, it's maybe not as precise as a more sporty offering today, but it just goes over the bumps really nice and delivers a good ride. The suspension's a little bit old school. It still has a telescopic fork with no spring preload or damping adjustment. But again, it goes over the bumps well. It does what it's supposed to do, and it delivers very favorable ride quality over bumpy roads. But when you're really getting some on this, the chassis is not quite as sporty as other bikes are in the class. But again, if you're someone who's just looking for a good riding, utilitarian, comfortable street bike, this SV650 fills that gap very well. Now, we're segueing how the GSX-8S is likely going to replace this bike, and you really feel it when you're sitting on this bike. The ergonomics on it, they're old school, very much so like how Kawasaki Z650 ABS ergonomics are. Triumph's old school, not the latest edition because we haven't operated that one yet, but the 2019, 2020, 2021 Street 765. These bikes have really old school ergonomics. It almost feels like you're riding a tricycle. The handlebars is real high with a lot of rearward sweep. And it's not that the ergonomics aren't good, it's just an old school way of doing it. Now the handlebars are wider, they're a little bit more aggressive, but not sport bike aggressive. And that's kind of how the modern ergonomics package is on these motorcycles. Still, if you're a smaller rider, someone of smaller stature, or who wants a real narrow motorcycle, this SV650 works really well. I like the seat on it. It's very comfortable. It's very low to the ground. You know, standing at 6 foot tall, this bike definitely feels almost like a mini bike for me, especially now that I'm a little bit bigger and gained a little bit of weight. But for someone looking for a nice city bike for running around town, or someone who's smaller of stature, you're gonna fit really well on this motorcycle. Conversely, the curb weight's kind of high, 430 pounds with a 3.8 gallons of fuel filled to the brim. That's kind of heavy. You know, realistically, when you're riding this bike though, it feels way lighter in motion or when you're sitting on it. It's just very compact, it's very playful, it's very easy to put where you want, but there's no denying that it's hefty at around 430 pounds. Now, the LCD instrumentation on this bike was pulled from Suzuki's old GSX S1000. It's simple and effective. I wish it had an ambient air temperature gauge, but it's easy to read. It gets the job done, no fuss, no muss. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a Motorcyclist magazine evaluation if we didn't operate this vehicle after hours. And that's one of the shortcomings of this SV650 is just this halogen bulb lighting. It just isn't as bright as a modern LED setup. We know this bike's not getting LEDs. This bike's likely going to be retired very soon, but it would still be nice if it benefited from LED light hardware. Now, in terms of maintenance and durability, these SV650 engines are just built so tough. Still, Suzuki recommends that you change the engine oil in these bikes every 3,500 miles. Oddly enough, it wants you to change the oil filter every other oil change. So you change the oil every 3,500 miles, and then every other time you change the oil filter. Kind of crazy that it would have that kind of recommendation. You also want to change the spark plugs every 7,500 miles. And Suzuki says that valve inspection intervals are right at 15,000 mile intervals. Realistically, these engines have a long history of being able to be worked and ridden very hard with very little maintenance and very little problems. These engines are very durable. So it's funny that the maintenance manual recommends such low mileage durations for a lot of the maintenance on these bikes, because in our experience, these things are built Ford tough. It's also neat that Suzuki gives you a little bit of tools and stuff. We're seeing these motorcycles nowadays to have less storage space under the seat, but Suzuki still gives a little bit of storage space and a little toolkit with its bike. Which brings us to price, folks. This 2023 SV650 retails for $7,400. If you want the ABS version, that's another $450. Brakes on this motorcycle, like the suspension, they're old school. We do like the triple hydraulic disc brakes. It's nice it has two front brake discs, but they're kind of small in diameter, the rotors, less than 300 millimeters. The master cylinder is non-radial, and the brakes do a good job of getting this bike stopped, but you're going to use a little bit of lever to get the brakes stopped on this vehicle. Again, not bad, but that's just one of the areas where Suzuki shows its age with its more rudimentary braking package. Still, for $7,400, this bike represents really good value in the class. You have to remember, bikes like the Tuning Fork Brands competition, they're all more expensive than this bike, and they don't offer the level of well-rounded handling of this bike. This thing goes over the bumps well. It's a little bit more sporty than some of the competition in the class, and it really brings up good value. And if you want one, you better hurry, because you got to remember Suzuki's GSX-8S replacement is almost $1,500 more expensive than this V-twin powered bike. So if you want an SV650, you better hurry and get one, because we're not saying that Suzuki's retiring this bike, but they're probably going to retire it. Well, folks, that's our review of Suzuki's legendary SV650. Sound off in the comments section. Do you want Suzuki to continue manufacturing this bike for 2023 and beyond? Do you want to see some updates to this bike? Or are you hell-bent on getting the new parallel twin-powered GSX-S? Sound off in the comments section. And as always, make sure to surf on over to motorcyclistonline.com. That's where all of our written content lives. We're going to be celebrating our 111th birthday this summer, and we can't wait to share some special content with you guys then. All right, folks, thanks for riding with us, and we'll see you in the next episode.